Hey guys, it's Jenna. In today's video, we're going to be going over my NATASHA DENONA Mini Bronze Eyeshadow Palette review. I finally got this little baby in the mail, so I can't wait to share with you guys my thoughts. If you did see my overview video where I talked about the palette and sort of my preliminary thoughts on it, as well as your thoughts, it was really fun to talk about and discuss what we thought this palette might be. And today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my thoughts on it, if I think it's worth the buy, the quality, etc. So let's get started. First things first, I did pick this up from NATASHA DENONA's website. Keep in mind, if you are Canadian, you will be dinged with duties because that just happens. I feel like every time I order a NATASHA palette, I probably should just wait until Sephora gets it, but I just never think about it at that time. So this is the Mini Bronze palette. It is supposed to be the shade extension of this palette, which is the Bronze Midi palette. You can see here, it's very reflective. You can see everything in the mirror here. But this one is actually a really lovely palette. I've been very impressed with it myself. I've really enjoyed the colors that are in here. There's a little bit of redundancy when it comes to color story, but I really do enjoy this one because it's heavily shimmer heavy in this palette, which I love. I'm a shimmer girl, so that just links up with my preferences perfectly. But I also really enjoy how warm this one is, especially in the summertime when you want to look really bronzy. I often pick this one up and the quality is really consistent. So when I saw a shade extension palette, a couple of thoughts kind of came into my head. This one is actually quite similar compared to the original Midi palette. Sometimes her shade extension palettes are actually quite a bit different, and so you can get quite a bit of different looks when you pair a Midi and its Mini. But this one actually is pretty similar. So we're going to talk about how similar it is as well. But structurally, we do have many, many more mattes compared to shimmers in this palette. So there is 4 mattes in here and 1 shimmer. That is a very, very big distinction compared to the Bronze Midi palette, which is shimmer dominant. So this one is matte dominant, and I think that could be NATASHA listening to feedback on the Bronze palette and sort of people kind of wanting more mattes in this color scheme. The price point of this is actually really attractive given that a lot of NATASHA DENONA's palettes are pretty expensive. So you do get a lot less pigment in here, but it is much more travel friendly as well. So these minis run for 27 American dollars or 34 Canadian dollars. For some reason, I thought that they were under, maybe they were 25 US dollars at one point. Am I making that up? I swear they were like around $25 at one point, but it could just be, you know, inflation and stuff. I don't know as to why they're different, or I could be just hallucinating, but I did think they were 25 USD at one point. Still, 27 USD right now makes it a lot more affordable compared to even the Midi sized. So if you're not into spending a ton of money, but getting a NATASHA DENONA experience, it's nice to pick up one of these. So when I look at a Mini, I always make sure that the quality is consistent because sometimes I find there's a little bit of a difference between them, and I just don't know why. If it's like a little bit of a dryness with some of these mattes or what, compared to other creamy mattes in her other palettes. I kind of compare formulations in their big palette form as well as in their mini palette. So let's talk about this one first. The first shade here is called Russet, and it just reminds me of russet potatoes, actually. It's the first thing I think of. This is a creamy matte that is a warm dark brown. We also have Flesh, which is actually a repeat shade, so thank you guys for pointing that out. Initially, I thought it was a completely brand new palette, but the Flesh shade is actually in another NATASHA DENONA palette. This is the creamy matte in a beiging nude color. We also have Gobi, which is a medium tangerine brown, also a creamy matte. Bronze Foil is the only shimmer, and it's actually a metallic. It is a metallic coppery bronze, and we also have Tough, which is a medium terracotta. These actually swatch really, really beautifully. I will say that the creamy matte formulation in the minis sometimes has just like the tiniest degree of a bit more dryness, and it could just be in my head, but this is one that's actually very strong performing. I did feel like I had to build up the swatch in Russet a little bit compared to the others, but this is a very strong swatched palette. Now, swatches give you a little bit of the story. Actually, performance is really what's best, but it's nice when you have a swatch that's incredibly pigmented as well. It's also kind of nice on the eyes. So This swatched very consistently, especially because 4 out of the 5 shades are the same formulation, but by far the metallic had the strongest swatch. It was very, very metallic, very shimmery, beautiful, consistent, almost creamy glide when I was swatching this. So the mattes have a little bit, like a teeny bit of a dryness compared to the creamy mattes in other bigger palettes, but that's also been consistently what I've seen with the minis. For today's look, I actually went with all of these shades to just see how they perform. So I went all over the lid with Flesh, and Flesh is actually a lot warmer than I was expecting. Of course, this is a warm palette, but I was like, whoa, of course, this is a lot warmer than a traditional beigey nude that might be more neutral. Really performed beautifully, and I really liked that there was no fallout with this one as well. The next shade I picked up is actually the Tough shade, which is that warm terracotta. I just layered over top of the first shade there. You don't have to do it this way, but I just prefer to layer when it comes to building the foundation of my eye looks, especially over a kind of beigey fleshy tone to start with. So this one also performed really beautifully. I felt like it had no fallout as well, blended really nice, and also layered really beautifully as well. I would say the two, I found I had to layer a couple of times to make sure that it was the full opacity before moving on to the next step. Next, we have the metallic that I applied, which is my favorite shade. I mean, as a shimmer girl, this one draws me in, of course, and this one is super, super beautiful. I actually just applied it with a fingertip. This is a consistent move for me when I work with her metallics. I just feel like it's a little bit easier to control the fallout that way, and also having the opacity and the pigmentation behind what I'm looking for, which is really optimizing that punch of shimmer, that metallicness on my eye look. So I'm okay with that, but if you are not a fan of using your fingertips, you can always spray a brush or use a denser brush for a little bit of more of a softer hue or a softer look overall. Do expect a little bit more fallout when using a brush. I did get a little bit with a fingertip too, but not as much as how I would with a brush. Next, I went in with the deeper shade, or the deepest shade. This is the shade Russet, a russet potato. And this one's also really beautiful. I just used a very small, detailed brush for this and placed it in the outer corner. Love that there's a little bit of that definition there. It's one of my favorite parts about this look. It's very sultry, bronzy, warm, just very beautiful for summer. This one also performed beautifully and no fallout. So loved that I could build this one up easy, especially with a dark pigment. I want to have a lot of control with this. I did kind of go on the lower lash line with the last matte, which is the Lash shade, and this is Gobi. This was named after a desert, apparently, which I didn't realize, so that's awesome. And this also performed beautifully, just matched really, really nicely with the rest of the look, and sort of rounded and completed the look perfectly. Let's talk about my thoughts with this one. And let's go into the comparisons as well, because the comparisons are going to be very important here. A lot of people were wondering if this one was similar to Mini Nude. Mini Nude is a very, very good one to compare it to. So I actually compared it to Mini Nude first. You can see here there are quite a few shades that are pretty similar, but you can see that there's a little bit of that neutrality with the Mini Nude when you look at those shades. So even though we have some similar shades, they're just a little bit different in their tones, right? We have more neutral shades in Mini Nude. We have more warm shades in Mini Bronze, but we do have some similar shades for sure. Next, we also wanted to compare it to Bronze Midi. I was actually curious how many of these in the Mini Bronze would actually match the Bronze palette almost exactly, and I was actually pretty shocked by this one. So there's a couple shades that don't match completely, and some of them very, very slightly, but there's a lot of similar shades when it comes to how these compare to each other. A lot of you guys made a really good point when I was talking about this palette in my preliminary video, just kind of an overview introducing it, that you guys thought this was one of her more similar palette extensions compared to some other ones that she's done, which I've also mentioned earlier in this video. And I do agree. I do think, yes, you get some more mattes with this. The shimmer's pretty close to the other shimmers in here. A lot of these mattes are similar too. It's a close one. It's a close one indeed. I do feel like if you are after this palette because you are wanting a completely different color story that's complementary to bronze and you just want to sort of enhance the color story a little bit, you might be a bit disappointed with this one because it is pretty close. Even this eye look, I feel like I could probably duplicate almost exactly with this palette. So if you are somebody that already owns this one and you're looking for something specifically unique, this probably won't be it because it's quite similar despite that there's like some different finishes, like the mattes versus more shimmers in here. But this appeals to a very particular buyer, which I'm going to talk about. If you do not have the bronze palette, you thought it was too redundant, it's not for you, maybe out of price point as well, this will serve your purposes really well, which is kind of exciting. The flip side is that because you can really get a gorgeous bronzy look with this palette, you don't need bronze necessarily in your life, and especially if you were sort of deterred from it for a couple of different reasons, like a lack of travel friendliness, more redundancy than you would like, maybe more shimmers than you would like. This will do you real well, I think. So that's sort of another thing to think about. It really depends on the type of makeup user that you are, the makeup buyer that you like. If you travel much more frequently, this is much better on a suitcase versus having a bigger palette that you're worried about breaking. Now, there's a couple other people that have suggested that this palette is similar to Biba, but just a warmer kind of Biba-ish type palette, and I would actually disagree here. There's not really any duplicate shades from Biba to this mini bronze. Not to say that they would have been duplicate, because Biba is basically neutral, right? All neutral, and this mini bronze is not. It's warmer. But looking at sort of what you guys mean by that, I could sort of see what you're saying, where this offers some clay colors in here, some very smooth mattes, but I can see what you're saying with how some of these clay mattes mimic this a little bit, but more on a neutral side of things. So if you are wanting kind of that look of those clay browns and those really gorgeous hues, you can do this with Biba if you are more into neutral tones. But remember, the Biba palette is quite a bit more money. It's a larger palette as well. I actually started my testing for the Lancome Teint Idole foundation as well. If you want my thoughts on this, I will 100% let you guys know, but I'm wearing it in today's video and I'm really impressed so far. So it's also kind of another side note. All right, here he is. Every time I get him, he is in such a daisy phase, I feel like, but remember, it's the bright lights. Anyway, he had an hour-long W today, so he is also exhausted with that, and he needs a little bit of a haircut, just a bit. Are you gonna yawn? Are you good? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more high-end and luxury reviews. We'll chat soon. Bye, guys.